a virus, which in Latin means poison, is the culprit of the symptomologies that are being treated, because you can't prove or disprove the virus. You can't prove it positively exists or negatively it exists. And this business of association without using scientific method for a non-existent phantom virus has been going on since the Spanish flu epidemic, and it was emphasized with polio, and then it was capitalized with HIV, and now we have what's going on with this the COVID-19, which is associated with COVID-2, which is associated with SARS, which is an acronym that stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. And anything that ends with a syndrome is the admittance that we don't understand what is the cause of this, so we have to call it a syndrome because we haven't determined the pathology of this disease. So it's difficult to diagnose something that you don't have hard scientific evidence of its existence. So you have to exercise then faith, and therefore, you know, COVID is only a concept that exists on a piece of paper. But in reality, you know, yes, people do have symptomologies, but you have to understand the pathology of this. Now, Sasha, I've been researching this effect on human membrane of blood cells for now close to 40 years. And I call it the corona effect. In fact, I actually have pictures that I've taken dated clear back to 1989 showing the scalloping or the appendages that are coming off blood cells. And this is a deterioration of the cell membrane due to the environment in which that cell resides in. So it's not a viral condition, it's a chemical, biochemical poisoning of the body fluids, which is causing cellular membrane breakdown and genetic mutation. In other words, it's endogenously created. So all the symptomologies, or the disease itself, COVID specifically, is a symptom of cell membrane deterioration and genetic mutation because of a compromised environment.
Let me jump in there. So how does it happen in Wuhan, and then in Milan, and in Qom, Iran, and United States almost simultaneously?
Well, there has to be contributing factors. So the question is, what are the contributing factors that are causing cellular membrane deterioration? Because if you were to test the interstitial fluids of the people that are so-called infected or having symptoms, what are the symptoms? The symptoms are dry cough. The symptoms are fever. The symptoms are inflammatory conditions. These can be documented and analyzed and quantified in the interstitial fluids of the interstitium, which is literally the septic tank of where the blood drops its waste and where the cell drops its waste. So each one of these people, and we've documented this, anyone that is so-called having these symptoms, which are identical to high altitude sicknesses, are suffering from oxygen deprivation because the blood can't get into the pulmonary vein and into the pulmonary capillaries to dump its carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen and return back to the blood. Why? Because the blood is coagulating and sticking together, forming clots. It looks like this. It's pathological coagulation due to contributing factors. The contributing factors can be radio waves, microwaves, gamma rays. It can be chemical poisoning. And when you look at the contributing factors and you look at when they switch the switch on 5G, which is an oscillating frequency at 60 gigahertz, that's a distributing factor that literally destroys the membrane of cells and uses up hemoglobin to buffer that radiation. So what's associated with this? In every case, we have a compromise of the interstitial fluids. In other words, the pH is dropping.
Yeah.
And what's happening is the body's then trying to respond to that. But oxygen deprivation or hypoxia is kind of like peeling the onion back to what is causing this respiratory disease, which is then causing the body to react to that. And so it starts putting out oxygen radicals from the immune system, or it starts trying to protect itself by developing antibodies. But the antibody is not specific to the disease. It's only specific to the symptoms in its protection to maintain the integrity of the internal fluids of the body. So this is an environmental problem, both outside from air pollution. Okay, so the larger cities, what are some of the characteristics? For example, New York City has over 15 cell towers, which they activated in New York City. Los Angeles has 450. Wuhan switched the switch on December 5th, 2019. The same day that they mandated vaccinations, flu vaccinations. So you've got these distributing factors of flu vaccination. In the United States, 67% of those over the age of 65 were vaccinated with the flu vaccine. Now, one of the ingredients in flu vaccine is aluminum oxide, which acts as an electromagnetic sink to radiation. It's like a homing beam. It attracts this non-ionizing radiation to your body. So radiation is a contributing factor. Chemical poisoning from air pollution, from vaccination injected directly into the intravascular system, compromises the blood and the interstitial fluids, thus setting up this coagulation that's taking place, the blood clotting, damaging the endothelial cells, causing the release of fibrin monomers or clotting factors to prevent internal bleeding. But all of the symptoms are unique, different than flu symptoms. And the symptoms are, lightheadedness, dizziness, muddled thinking, cold hands, cold feet. These are all circulatory problems, not associated with any virus at all, but associated with what is called pathological blood coagulation, and the medical term is DIC, or disseminated intravascular coagulation. If you look at the total deaths for the last 3 years, this year they're 2% less than the last 3 years. So if there is a pandemic, where is the increase in deaths? There's only one answer to this. This was all orchestrated. The smoke screen is virus. Now, why use a virus? Because viruses like the polio virus, the HIV virus, the Ebola virus, the SARS virus, which is the COVID-2 and 19, they have never been cultured, they've never been purified, and they've never been identified by using the scientific method, the gold standard, which is Koch's postulate. So why not use the virus theory, okay, as the smokescreen to orchestrate a pandemic of epidemic proportions associated with a non-existent that nobody can prove, that they've already indoctrinated at the collegiate level, at the graduate level, that there's this so-called virus. For example, when I did my paper on polio, there was no polio virus. The cause of polio was caused by a chemical poisoning of DDT. When they came out last year as a test, it was a test, 2 years, actually 3 years ago. It was a test to test this smoke screen of virus, which I believe is a religion because it's not based on the scientific method. Zika was associated with a chemical poisoning, and birth defects and encephalitis was due to the poison glyphosate. So with each virus, there is a poison. If we go back to the meaning of the word virus in Latin, it means poison. So what is happening is the human race is being systemically poisoned which is throwing them into a pathological coagulation of the blood, causing oxygen deprivation. Because if you understand the biology here, red blood cells, which contain hemoglobin, which holds on to the carbon dioxide or the oxygen, has to go into the pulmonary system, into the capillaries of the pulmonary system, to the alveoli, which are sacs in the lung that hold oxygen, to drop off their oxygen or drop off their carbon dioxide and collect their oxygen. They have to do that single file. So if they can, if science, which I believe they know, I know this, and I've known it for 40 years, that you can induce pathological coagulation, which then leads to oxygen deprivation, which then leads to respiratory interstitial fluid disease, which then leads to the death of the cell. And what they're measuring, what is being measured, are cellular fragments of RNA or DNA, and then they're associating that as AHA. And they're associating exosomes, which are released by the cell as a protection to stop the breakdown of the endothelium, which is a single cell membrane to protect the arteries from breaking, and you die from internal bleeding. So what happens is a cascade of clotting factors are released, causing pathological blood coagulation to prevent internal bleeding. But then the blood can't go into the lungs to drop its carbon dioxide, so you die from carbon dioxide poisoning. This is the main cause. There's no virus here. It's carbon dioxide poisoning.
And that's why it looks like altitude. It looks like people have been dropped from high altitude for that reason.
If you have the same symptoms, you'll have fever, you'll have dry cough, you'll go into hypoxia. You'll be gasping for air, shallow breathing. That same, if you hike up the Himalayan mountains, okay, and you get up to, 10, 12, 20,000 feet, you can't breathe. You have to have oxygen at that level. But the problem is if you're in pathological coagulation and then you ventilate the patient, all you do is you put that patient at risk, because the problem's not the lung, the problem is the blood. The question is, that's why hydroxychloroquine works, because it raises the pH of the fluids of the blood and the interstitium fluids, which then provides more nascent oxygen that helps to break up the pathological coagulation. But you do that with zinc, you do that with N-acetylcysteine, by breathing that in, N-acetylcysteine, glutathione, antioxidants or nascent oxygen, atomic oxygen or O1 with chlorine dioxide. These are the compounds that save people's lives.
Right.
In fact, many years ago, I offered a $5 million reward for anyone that could isolate, purify, and identify the infectious nature of HIV. The same thing applies for COVID or SARS. I offered $5 million cash, and there's not a single person in the world that has ever come forward with the identification of these so-called virus. Like I say, they exist as a concept on a piece of paper.
Got it.
This does not cause what's causing right now this epidemic, which is an economic epidemic, a social economic, a population control epidemic, to facilitate outcomes of, I think you have some beautiful names for these people.
Yeah.